The morning sun cast long shadows across the forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan as Master Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison adjusted his tactical vest one final time. The SEAL team had been operating in this godforsaken valley for 3 weeks, tracking a high-value target through terrain that seemed designed by the devil himself. Rocky outcroppings jutted from the earth like broken teeth, and the air carried the constant threat of enemy fire. Morrison had seen 22 years of service, from the humid jungles of South America to the burning sands of Iraq. His weathered face bore the marks of 1,000 operations, and his steel-gray eyes held the kind of focus that came only from surviving situations where lesser men had fallen. The team respected him not just for his rank, but for the way he could read a battlefield like others read morning newspapers. The intel had come in during the pre-dawn hours. A convoy of Taliban fighters was moving weapons through the valley, using routes they thought were invisible to American surveillance. They were wrong. The drone footage showed vehicles winding through narrow passes, heading toward a compound that intelligence suggested housed bomb-making materials destined for. Cabell Morrison gathered his 5-man team around a folding table where satellite images were spread like a deadly puzzle. Petty Officer Rodriguez, their communications specialist, pointed to intercept coordinates while Sergeant Chen traced potential extraction routes with his finger. The plan was clean and simple, the kind Morrison preferred. They would insert via helicopter, establish overwatch positions, and call in precision strikes on the convoy before it could reach its destination. "Sir, weather's turning ugly fast," Rodriguez announced, pressing his headset closer to his ear. "Winds are picking up, visibility dropping. Pilot says we've got maybe a 2-hour window before conditions become unsuitable for rotary aircraft." Morrison studied the meteorological data on Rodriguez's tablet. The Hindu Kush Mountains were notorious for sudden weather changes that could trap aircraft in valleys or slam them into peaks with zero warning. He had lost friends to mountain weather, good operators who became statistics because someone made the wrong call about flying conditions. "What's our backup extraction plan?" Chen asked, checking his rifle scope for the 100th time that morning. Morrison pulled up the tactical map on his personal device. The nearest friendly airfield was 40 kilometers away, across terrain that would take days to cross on foot if they were compromised. Standard operating procedure called for multiple extraction options, but this valley offered limited choices. Helicopters were ideal for the rocky terrain, but if weather grounded, the team would need alternatives. "We'll have close air support on station," Morrison replied, pointing to frequency cards taped inside his wrist-mounted GPS unit. "If rotary assets can't reach us, we call in whatever's flying. Transport planes, fighters, anything with wings, and enough space to get us out." The team nodded, understanding the implications. Emergency extractions rarely went according to plan, and flexibility often meant the difference between coming home and becoming a memorial wall statistic. Morrison had pulled his men out of impossible situations before, using everything from cargo helicopters to captured enemy vehicles. As they conducted final equipment checks, Morrison's radio crackled with updates from the Tactical Operations Center. The target convoy was moving faster than expected, forcing them to accelerate their timeline. Weather conditions were deteriorating ahead of schedule, with mountain winds already reaching dangerous velocities for aircraft operations. "Load up," Morrison ordered, shouldering his pack. "We're Oscar Mike in 5 minutes." The team moved with practiced efficiency toward the helicopter landing zone. Their pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Martinez, was already conducting pre-flight checks on the UH-60 Blackhawk that would carry them into the valley. Martinez had been flying combat missions for 8 years, and Morrison trusted his judgment completely. If Martinez said they could make it in and out, Morrison believed him. The helicopter's rotors began spinning as the team approached, kicking up clouds of dust and debris. Morrison climbed into the cabin, settling into his familiar position near the door where he could observe terrain features during flight. The other team members took their assigned seats, checking weapons and communications equipment one final time. Martinez's voice came through their headsets as the aircraft lifted off. "Chief, I'm showing deteriorating conditions at the target area. We can get you in, but extraction might be problematic if this weather doesn't break." Morrison acknowledged the warning while studying GPS coordinates on his handheld device. The mission was critical enough to accept increased risk, but He needed contingency plans if their primary extraction helicopter couldn't reach them. He switched to the command frequency and began coordinating with the Tactical Operations Center about backup options. "Control, this is Neptune 6. Morrison spoke into his headset microphone. "Request you have close air support and emergency extraction assets on standby. Weather conditions may compromise rotary wing operations in our area." The response came immediately. "Neptune 6, we have multiple aircraft available if needed. What are your requirements for emergency extraction?" Morrison considered the question while watching mountain peaks slide past the helicopter windows. His team was light and mobile, but they would need an aircraft capable of landing on rough terrain if conventional helicopters couldn't reach them. Fixed-wing aircraft offered more stability in bad weather, but required suitable landing areas that were rare in Afghanistan's mountains. "Control, if we need emergency extraction, any aircraft that can land and take off from unprepared surfaces will work," Morrison replied. "We're not particular about the platform as long as it has wings and can fly us out." The words carried more confidence than Morrison actually felt. Emergency extractions were always dangerous, involving aircraft and pilots operating outside normal parameters in hostile territory. Success depended on skill, luck, and the kind of split-second decision-making that separated living operators from dead heroes. As the helicopter approached their insertion point, Morrison could see weather conditions, worsening exactly as predicted. Clouds were building around mountain peaks, and wind indicators on his GPS showed velocities approaching the maximum limits for safe helicopter operations. The mission window was closing rapidly, and they hadn't even reached the ground yet. Martinez announced their approach to the landing zone, and Morrison prepared his team for insertion. Whatever happened next, they would adapt and overcome. 22 years of military service had taught him that plans were useful until the shooting started, and then survival depended on training, experience, and the ability to make good decisions under pressure. The helicopter settled onto rocky ground with barely enough space for its rotors to clear surrounding boulders. Morrison and his team quickly exited the aircraft, moving toward their overwatch positions as Martinez lifted off into increasingly threatening skies. The SEAL team was now committed to the mission, with extraction dependent on weather, luck, and whatever aircraft might be available when they needed it most. The team moved through the rocky terrain like ghosts, using natural cover to mask their approach toward the overwatch position. Morrison led from the front, his movements calculated and deliberate as he navigated between boulders and sparse vegetation. Behind him, his 5 operators followed in tactical formation, maintaining proper spacing while keeping visual contact with each other. The Taliban convoy was still 2 hours out according to the latest intelligence updates, giving the team time to establish their hide site and coordinate with air assets. Morrison selected a ridgeline that offered commanding views of the valley floor, while providing multiple escape routes if their position became compromised. The rocks provided natural camouflage, and the elevation gave them excellent fields of fire for calling in airstrikes. Rodriguez immediately began setting up the satellite communication array that would link them to overhead surveillance and strike aircraft. The compact antenna assembled quickly, and within minutes they had clear communications with both the Tactical Operations Center and the drone aircraft orbiting high above the valley. Real-time imagery showed the convoy still moving along predicted routes, but weather conditions were definitely deteriorating. Chen and the other team members established security positions while Morrison studied the terrain through high-powered binoculars. The valley floor stretched for kilometers in both directions, with the main road winding between rock formations that would channel enemy vehicles into predetermined kill zones. It was a perfect setup for an ambush, assuming everything went according to plan. "Chief, I'm getting updated weather reports," Rodriguez announced quietly, adjusting his headset. "Winds are now gusting to 40 knots with visibility dropping to less than 2 kilometers in some areas. The helicopter crews are saying extraction might be impossible within the next 4 hours." Morrison acknowledged the information while continuing his terrain study. Bad weather was a constant factor in Afghan operations, but this system seemed to be building faster and more severely than the meteorologists had predicted. He had operated in worse conditions, but never with such limited extraction options in hostile territory. The radio crackled with updates from the overhead drone. The Taliban convoy had stopped at a compound approximately 15 kilometers south of their position, apparently waiting for improved weather conditions before continuing their journey. The delay gave Morrison's team additional time to prepare, but it also meant they might be stuck in position longer than originally planned. "Control, this is Neptune 6, Morrison spoke into his microphone. "Target convoy has halted movement. Request status update on close air support and alternative extraction assets." The response came within seconds. "Neptune 6, we have F-16 fighters on station with full ordnance loads. For extraction, we're positioning additional assets including transport aircraft capable of rough field operations. Weather is affecting all rotary wing aircraft in your area." Morrison felt a slight relief knowing that strike aircraft were available, but the extraction situation remained problematic. Transport planes required much longer landing areas than helicopters, and suitable sites were extremely limited in this mountainous terrain. He began mentally cataloging possible landing zones within reasonable distance of their position. Chen moved up beside Morrison, pointing toward a relatively flat area about 2 kilometers east of their hide site. "Chief, that looks like it might work for a fixed-wing extraction if we need it. It's rough, but I've seen C-130s land on worse terrain." Morrison studied the area through his binoculars, noting surface conditions and potential obstacles. The makeshift landing strip was far from ideal, but it represented their best option if helicopters couldn't reach them. The terrain was rocky and uneven, requiring a skilled pilot willing to take significant risks in marginal weather conditions. "Rodriguez, get me detailed weather updates every 15 minutes, Morrison ordered. "I want to know the exact conditions at that potential landing site and how they're trending." The next 2 hours passed with professional efficiency, as the team maintained overwatch on the convoy's location while coordinating with air assets. The Taliban vehicles remained stationary at the compound, apparently waiting for weather conditions to improve before continuing their journey north toward Kabul. Morrison used the time to refine their tactical plan and coordinate with the overhead fighters. The F-16s carried precision-guided missiles capable of destroying the entire convoy without risking civilian casualties in the surrounding area. Once the vehicles began moving again, the team would have clear shots at targets in the open terrain. At 13:47 hours, the convoy finally began moving. Rodriguez immediately relayed the information to both the Tactical Operations Center and the orbiting strike aircraft. Morrison watched through binoculars as 5 vehicles emerged from the compound and began following the valley road toward their position. "Control, this is Neptune 6, Morrison transmitted. "Target convoy is moving north along Route Bravo. Request immediate clearance to engage with close air support." The authorization came quickly. "Neptune 6, you are cleared hot. Engage all enemy vehicles. No friendly forces in the area." Morrison coordinated with the F-16 pilots, providing precise target descriptions and ensuring they understood the engagement parameters. The strike aircraft began their attack runs within minutes, diving from high altitude to deliver precision missiles against the moving convoy. The first missile struck the lead vehicle with devastating accuracy, creating a fireball that could be seen for kilometers. The remaining vehicles scattered, trying to find cover among the rocks, but they were caught in open terrain with nowhere to hide. Subsequent strikes eliminated each target with clinical precision. "Control, this is Neptune 6, Morrison reported. "All targets destroyed. Mission accomplished. Request immediate extraction due to deteriorating weather conditions." The response was not what Morrison wanted to hear. "Neptune 6, rotary wing extraction is impossible due to weather. We're coordinating alternative extraction methods. Stand by for further instructions." Morrison looked at his team, noting their professional composure despite the developing situation. They had successfully completed their primary mission, but now they faced the challenge of getting out of hostile territory in deteriorating weather conditions. Radio chatter indicated that enemy forces in the area were aware of the convoy's destruction and were beginning to search for the responsible parties. "Chief, we've got movement from the compound," Chen reported, studying the area through his rifle scope. "Looks like they're sending out search teams." Morrison confirmed the observation through his binoculars. Multiple vehicles were leaving the compound and spreading throughout the valley, obviously searching for the team that had called in the airstrike. Time was becoming a critical factor, as they needed extraction before enemy forces could locate their position. Rodriguez received an updated message from the Tactical Operations Center. "Chief, they're saying emergency extraction is available, but it won't be a helicopter. They've got other aircraft standing by, but the pilots will need confirmation of suitable landing areas and weather conditions." Morrison studied the potential landing site Chen had identified earlier. Weather conditions were marginal at best, with winds gusting unpredictably and visibility limited by blowing dust and cloud cover. Any pilot attempting a landing in such conditions would be taking enormous risks, but staying in place meant almost certain contact with searching enemy forces. "Control, this is Neptune 6, Morrison transmitted. "We can provide landing zone for fixed-wing extraction at grid coordinates follow." He provided precise GPS coordinates for the rough landing strip they had identified, along with current weather observations from their position. The radio remained silent for several long minutes before Control responded. "Neptune 6, we have aircraft available for emergency extraction. Pilot needs to know exact surface conditions and any obstacles in the landing area." Morrison realized that their extraction was going to depend entirely on the skill and courage of whatever pilot was willing to attempt a landing in such dangerous conditions. He had made similar requests before, usually confident that military aviators would find a way to complete the mission regardless of risk. "Control," Morrison replied. "Any plane will work. We're not particular about the platform." The radio crackled with static before a crisp, professional voice came through Morrison's headset. The accent was unmistakably American, but there was something different about the tone, something that made Morrison pause his equipment check and listen more carefully to the transmission. "Neptune 6, this is Hog 17. I copy your request for emergency extraction at the coordinates provided. I'm currently 15 minutes out from your location in an A-10 Thunderbolt. Can you confirm landing zone dimensions and surface conditions?" Morrison exchanged glances with Chen, both men recognizing the significance of what they had just heard. The A-10 Thunderbolt, nicknamed the Warthog, was a close air support aircraft built around a massive 30mm cannon designed to destroy enemy tanks. It was not typically used for personnel extraction, and Morrison had never heard of one attempting to land on rough terrain to pick up ground forces. "Hog 17, this is Neptune 6, Morrison replied cautiously. "Confirm you are an A-10 aircraft requesting landing zone information for personnel extraction?" The response came immediately, delivered with the kind of confidence Morrison associated with experienced combat pilots. "Neptune 6, that is affirmative. I understand you need emergency extraction due to weather and enemy activity. My aircraft can accommodate your team if surface conditions permit landing and takeoff operations." Rodriguez was already pulling up technical specifications for the A-10 on his tactical computer. The aircraft was designed for close air support missions, not transport operations, but it did have minimal space behind the pilot's seat that could theoretically accommodate passengers in extreme emergency situations. More importantly, the Thunderbolt was built for operations from rough airfields and could handle surface conditions that would destroy other aircraft. Morrison studied the improvised landing zone through his binoculars while considering their options. Enemy search teams were getting closer to their position and weather conditions were continuing to deteriorate. A conventional extraction by helicopter was clearly impossible, and waiting for better conditions might mean capture or death. "Hog 17, advise your experience with rough field landings," Morrison transmitted. "Surface is rocky terrain, approximately 800 meters long. Minimal preparation. Winds gusting to 40 knots. There was a brief pause before the pilot responded, and Morrison detected something in the voice that he couldn't quite identify. The tone remained professional, but there seemed to be an edge of excitement or perhaps determination that suggested this pilot was looking forward to the challenge. "Neptune 6, I have extensive experience with unconventional operations. Surface. Conditions you describe are within acceptable parameters for emergency extraction. I can be on deck in 12 minutes if you can provide security for the landing zone." Morrison made his decision quickly, based on years of experience evaluating risk versus benefit in combat situations. Staying in position meant almost certain contact with enemy forces, while attempting extraction by A-10 represented their best chance of getting out alive. regardless of how unconventional the method might be. Hog 17, you are cleared for landing at provided coordinates. We will establish security perimeter and mark landing zone with IR strobes. Be advised, enemy forces are actively searching this area. The pilot's response carried a note of satisfaction that surprised Morrison. Neptune 6, I understand the tactical situation. Beginning approach to your location now. Prepare for immediate extraction upon landing. Morrison gathered his team and began moving toward the improvised landing zone, using available cover to avoid detection by enemy search parties. The sound of the approaching A-10 was already audible in the distance, growing louder as the aircraft descended toward their position. Chen had taken point security, watching for enemy movement while the rest of the team prepared the landing area. Rodriguez was coordinating with overhead surveillance, providing updates on enemy positions and ensuring the incoming aircraft had current intelligence about threats in the area. Chief, I'm showing enemy vehicles about 3 kilometers south and closing, Rodriguez reported. They're definitely moving in our direction, probably following the sound of our extraction aircraft. Morrison acknowledged the information while setting up IR markers to guide the pilot during landing. The A-10's distinctive engine noise was getting louder, and he could see the aircraft's silhouette against the overcast sky. The pilot was approaching from the west, using terrain features to mask the aircraft's approach from enemy positions. The Thunderbolt appeared over the ridge line like a gray predator, flying low and fast despite the challenging weather conditions. Morrison was impressed by the pilot's skill in handling the aircraft under such difficult circumstances, maintaining precise control despite turbulence and limited visibility. As the A-10 began its landing approach, Morrison got his first clear view of the aircraft and immediately noticed something that made him stop moving entirely. Through the cockpit canopy, he could see the pilot's helmet and flight gear. But there was something unexpected about the figure in the pilot's seat. The aircraft touched down on the rocky surface with surprising gentleness, the pilot demonstrating exceptional skill in managing the landing despite challenging conditions. Dust and debris kicked up by the engines reduced visibility to almost zero, but Morrison could hear the aircraft's engines spooling down as the pilot prepared for immediate departure. Morrison's team began moving toward the aircraft, maintaining security while approaching the strange sight of an A-10 Thunderbolt, sitting on a makeshift landing strip in hostile territory. The canopy remained closed as the pilot conducted post-landing checks, and Morrison still couldn't get a clear view of the person who had just accomplished what he considered an impossible landing. Rodriguez was monitoring enemy communications, providing updates on the approaching search teams. Chief, we've got multiple vehicles converging on this area. Estimate contact in less than 10 minutes. Morrison acknowledged the warning while watching the A-10's canopy begin to open. The pilot was moving efficiently through shutdown procedures, preparing the aircraft for immediate departure once the SEAL team was aboard. Morrison approached the aircraft, ready to coordinate loading procedures with whoever had just risked their life to extract his team. The canopy opened fully, and the pilot began removing flight helmet and equipment in preparation for passenger loading. Morrison found himself staring at shoulder-length brown hair and distinctly feminine features as the pilot turned to look in his direction. Captain Sarah Mitchell removed her helmet completely, revealing a face that belonged unmistakably to a woman. She was young, probably in her late 20s, with the kind of focused intensity Morrison associated with combat veterans despite her apparent youth. Her flight suit bore the patches and insignia of an experienced A-10 pilot, including decorations that indicated combat experience. Morrison felt his assumptions about military aviation shifting as he processed what he was seeing. He had worked with female pilots before, but never in such extreme circumstances, and never with someone willing to attempt such a dangerous extraction mission in an aircraft not designed for personnel transport. Captain Mitchell looked directly at Morrison, her expression serious but calm despite the extraordinary circumstances. Master Chief, I need your team aboard immediately. We have maybe 5 minutes before those search teams reach firing positions. Morrison realized he was staring and quickly recovered his professional composure. The pilot's gender was irrelevant to their current tactical situation, and her demonstrated skill in reaching their location under impossible conditions proved her competence beyond any doubt. Yes, ma'am, Morrison replied, then turned to his team. Load up. We're Oscar Mike in 30 seconds. As his team began boarding the aircraft, Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that this extraction was going to be unlike anything he had experienced in 22 years of military service. Captain Sarah Mitchell had been flying combat missions in Afghanistan for 18 months, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for the radio call she received that afternoon. She was returning from a close air support mission near Kandahar when the emergency extraction request came through her headset with unusual urgency. Any available aircraft for emergency extraction of ground forces, the controller's voice had announced. Rotary wing assets unavailable due to weather. Mission requires rough field landing capability in hostile territory. Mitchell immediately responded, despite knowing that A-10 aircraft were never used for personnel extraction. The Thunderbolt was designed to destroy enemy armor, not transport passengers, but she also knew that desperate situations sometimes required unconventional solutions. Her aircraft was low on ammunition after the previous mission, making her available for alternative tasking. The conversation with Neptune 6 had revealed the scope of the challenge she was accepting. A SEAL team was trapped in deteriorating weather with enemy forces closing on their position. The improvised landing zone was far below normal safety standards, with rocky terrain and dangerous crosswinds that would challenge even the most experienced pilots. Mitchell had grown up on her father's ranch in Montana, learning to fly small aircraft on grass strips that were barely suitable for crop dusters. Her childhood experience with rough field operations had served her well during military flight training, and she had always been more comfortable with challenging landings than her male counterparts seemed to be. The decision to attempt the extraction had been automatic. Fellow service members needed help, and she had the skills and aircraft to provide assistance. The fact that an A-10 had never been used for such a mission simply meant she would be setting a new precedent. As she approached the landing zone, Mitchell could see the SEAL team's IR markers through her night vision system, despite the daylight conditions. The weather was indeed marginal, with gusting winds that made precise control difficult. But she had landed in worse conditions during training exercises in Alaska. The landing approach required every bit of skill she had developed during hundreds of hours in the cockpit. Crosswinds tried to push her aircraft sideways while downdrafts threatened to slam her into the rocky terrain. She compensated with subtle control inputs, feeling the aircraft respond to her commands like a well-trained horse responding to an experienced rider. Touchdown was surprisingly smooth despite the challenging conditions. Mitchell had always prided herself on gentle landings, believing that passengers and aircraft both deserved to be treated with respect. The rocky surface grabbed at her landing gear, but the A-10's rugged construction handled the abuse without complaint. As she completed her post-landing checklist, Mitchell could see the SEAL team approaching her aircraft. She had worked with Special Operations Forces before, providing close air support during their missions, but she had never met any of them face-to-face. Her mental image of SEALs was based on movies and briefings, creating expectations of larger-than-life warriors who never showed weakness or uncertainty. The team leader approaching her aircraft looked exactly as she had expected. Tall, weathered, and carrying himself with the kind of confidence that came from surviving impossible situations. His tactical gear was worn and functional, bearing the marks of extensive field use, and his eyes held the focused intensity she associated with special operations personnel. Mitchell removed her helmet as the canopy opened, shaking out her hair while preparing to coordinate passenger loading. She had learned early in her military career that revealing her gender often caused momentary confusion among personnel who weren't expecting to work with female pilots. The reaction was usually brief and professional, but it was predictable, enough that she had learned to manage it efficiently. The SEAL team leader stopped moving when he saw her, his expression shifting from professional urgency to something closer to surprise. Mitchell recognized the look, having seen it countless times during her military career. Male service members, regardless of their experience or professionalism, often needed a moment to adjust their expectations when encountering women in combat roles. "Master Chief, I need your team aboard immediately," Mitchell announced, keeping her voice crisp and professional. "We have maybe 5 minutes before those search teams reach firing positions." The SEAL leader recovered quickly, displaying the kind of adaptability she expected from elite operators. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, then turned to coordinate his team's boarding procedures. Mitchell watched the 5 operators climb into her aircraft, noting their efficient movements despite the unconventional situation. The A-10's passenger space was extremely limited, basically a cramped area behind the pilot's seat that had never been designed for human occupancy. The SEALs managed to squeeze themselves and their equipment into the available space with impressive flexibility. Rodriguez, the team's communications specialist, managed to wedge himself into position where he could continue monitoring enemy communications during flight. Chen had somehow arranged his long frame in a space that seemed impossibly small, while the other team members demonstrated similar adaptability in making themselves fit. Morrison climbed in last, positioning himself where he could observe flight operations while maintaining command authority over his team. Mitchell appreciated his professional demeanor despite what she knew must be significant concern about flying in an aircraft not designed for passengers. "Everyone secure?" Mitchell asked, beginning her pre-takeoff checklist. "Ready for departure, ma'am?" Morrison replied. Mitchell advanced the throttles and felt her aircraft respond immediately. The A-10's twin engines provided massive power for takeoff, easily lifting the additional weight of 6 passengers despite the challenging surface conditions. She had always loved the Thunderbolt's raw power and reliability, characteristics that made it perfect for operating in hostile environments. As they climbed away from the landing zone, Mitchell could see enemy vehicles converging on their former position. The timing had been close, with perhaps 2 minutes separating successful extraction from potential disaster. She banked the aircraft toward friendly airspace while Rodriguez provided updates on enemy radio traffic. "Ma'am, they're reporting our takeoff to higher command," Rodriguez announced from his cramped position. "Sounds like they're pretty frustrated about missing us." Mitchell smiled despite the continuing danger. "Well, gentlemen, I guess we've given them something to talk about." Morrison's voice came through the intercom system with unmistakable respect. "Captain, that was exceptional flying. I've never seen anything like that landing." Mitchell felt a surge of professional satisfaction at the compliment. Earning respect from special operations personnel was never easy, and she knew that Morrison's words carried significant weight. The mission was far from over, but they had successfully completed the most dangerous phase. The flight back to friendly territory took 40 minutes through increasingly turbulent weather. Mitchell had to adjust course several times to avoid the worst turbulence, while her passengers endured conditions that would have challenged experienced airline travelers. The SEALs never complained, maintaining their professional composure despite obvious discomfort. As they approached the forward operating base, Mitchell could see helicopter crews waiting to resume normal extraction operations once weather conditions improved. Her unconventional mission had filled a critical gap, proving that military aviation could adapt to meet unexpected requirements when lives were at stake. Landing at the FOB was routine compared to their departure from the improvised strip. But Mitchell took the same care with her approach that she had demonstrated throughout the mission. As the aircraft came to a stop, she realized that her relationship with conventional military aviation had probably changed forever. The SEAL team began extracting themselves from the cramped passenger compartment, moving with obvious relief at being back in friendly territory. Morrison waited until his men were clear before approaching Mitchell's position in the cockpit. "Captain," Morrison said formally, "I want you to know that was the most professional piece of flying I've ever witnessed. You saved 6 lives today." Mitchell felt genuine emotion at the words, knowing they came from someone whose opinion carried enormous weight in the special operations community. Master Chief Morrison found himself in unfamiliar territory as he watched Captain Mitchell complete her post-flight procedures. 22 years of military service had taught him to evaluate people based on their actions under pressure, yet he realized he had never fully examined his own assumptions about gender roles in combat aviation until this moment. The debriefing took place in a temporary shelter adjacent to the flight line, where Morrison's team provided detailed accounts of their mission and extraction to intelligence officers. Captain Mitchell participated in the session, answering technical questions about her aircraft's performance and the feasibility of using A-10s for future extraction missions. "Captain, can you walk us through your decision-making process during the approach?" Colonel Stevens, the base operations officer, asked while reviewing flight data on his tablet. Mitchell referenced her kneeboard notes while responding. Sir, the primary challenge was managing crosswinds while maintaining precise altitude control over uneven terrain. I used a modified short-field approach, compensating for wind shear by maintaining higher than normal approach speeds until the last few hundred feet. Morrison listened to her technical explanation, impressed by her analytical approach to what had seemed like intuitive flying during the actual extraction. Her ability to break down complex piloting decisions into teachable components suggested someone who understood her profession at a level far beyond basic competency. What about passenger loading? Stevens continued. That aircraft wasn't designed for personnel transport. No, sir, but the space behind the pilot's seat can accommodate passengers in emergency situations, Mitchell replied. Weight and balance remained within acceptable limits and center of gravity stayed within operational parameters throughout the flight. Morrison realized that Mitchell had probably calculated passenger weight and aircraft performance factors while his team was still boarding, managing multiple critical variables simultaneously while preparing for takeoff from hostile territory. The level of professional competence required for such multitasking was extraordinary. Rodriguez, who had monitored enemy communications during their flight, added his perspective to the debriefing. Ma'am, I have to say, the smoothness of that takeoff probably saved our lives. If we had bounced around on that rough surface, those enemy vehicles would have had clear shots at us. Mitchell nodded, appreciating his honesty. That's a fair reaction, Chief. I've been dealing with initial surprise my entire career. What matters is what happens after that first moment. Morrison found himself reflecting on his own evolution as a leader. Early in his career, he had harbored doubts about women in combat roles, concerns rooted more in cultural conditioning than actual experience. Today's mission had challenged those assumptions in ways that formal training or policy directives never could. Ma'am, I have to tell you something, Morrison continued. When I made that radio call saying any plane would work, I was thinking about male pilots I'd worked with before. I had expectations based on past experience, and those expectations didn't include someone like you. And now, Mitchell asked? Now I know that the best pilot is simply the best pilot, regardless of any other factors, Morrison replied. You prove that today in ways that no classroom discussion or policy manual ever could. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Colonel Stevens, who had been reviewing mission reports with higher command. His expression suggested that Morrison and Mitchell's unconventional extraction had attracted attention beyond the local base level. Captain Mitchell, Chief Morrison, Stevens announced, I just got off a call with Division Command. They want detailed documentation of today's extraction procedures, including technical specifications for using A-10s in personnel recovery operations. Morrison sensed the implications immediately. Military bureaucracy always wanted to analyze and systematize successful innovations, turning individual acts of heroism into standardized procedures that could be replicated by other units. Mitchell's improvised extraction might become an official capability. Sir, are they considering A-10s for regular extraction missions? Mitchell asked. They're certainly interested in the possibility, Stevens replied. Your mission proves that fixed-wing aircraft can provide extraction capabilities when helicopters are unavailable. That has significant implications for special operations planning. Morrison realized that Mitchell had accomplished something beyond saving 6 lives. She had demonstrated new tactical possibilities that might change how the military approached personnel recovery in hostile environments. Her willingness to attempt an unprecedented mission had opened doors that might benefit countless future operations. Over the following hours, Morrison found himself observing Mitchell's interactions with other personnel on the base. Word of the extraction had spread quickly through the small military community, and her reputation was evolving in real time. Pilots who had previously viewed her as a competent but unremarkable colleague now sought her opinions on technical matters. The maintenance chief, a grizzled sergeant with 30 years of experience, approached Mitchell with questions about aircraft performance during the rough field landing. Ma'am, how did the landing gear handle that surface? I'm seeing some unusual wear patterns that I've never encountered before. Mitchell walked with him toward her aircraft, explaining stress factors and performance parameters with the kind of technical knowledge that impressed seasoned maintenance personnel. Morrison watched the interaction, noting how professional respect was replacing whatever preconceptions might have existed before. Later that evening, Morrison's team gathered for their traditional post-mission review in the temporary quarters they shared. The conversation inevitably turned to their unconventional extraction and the pilot who had made it possible. "Chief, I've got to admit something," Chen said while cleaning his rifle. "When I first saw Captain Mitchell, I wondered if we were in trouble. I've never had a woman pilot extract me from hostile territory." Rodriguez nodded agreement. "Same here. Not because I doubted her abilities, but because it was just so unexpected. You don't see many female A-10 pilots." Morrison seized the opportunity to address the topic directly. "Gentlemen, I think today taught us something important about making assumptions. Captain Mitchell proved that competence and courage aren't gender-specific characteristics." The team members exchanged glances, recognizing the significance of their leader's words. Morrison had never been particularly vocal about social issues, preferring to focus on operational matters. But today's events had clearly affected his perspective. "She definitely earned my respect," one of the younger operators added. "That landing was incredible, and she never acted like it was a big deal, just professional from start to finish." Morrison felt satisfaction at his team's response. Elite operators were generally quick to recognize exceptional performance, regardless of who demonstrated it. Mitchell's actions had spoken louder than any policy directive or sensitivity training could have. As the evening progressed, Morrison found himself thinking about the broader implications of the day's events. Military culture was changing, sometimes gradually and sometimes through dramatic moments like their extraction. Mitchell represented a new generation of service members who would judge colleagues based on performance rather than demographics. The next morning brought new orders for Morrison's team, reassignment to a different area of operations that would separate them from Captain Mitchell and her unit. As they prepared to depart, Morrison made a point of finding Mitchell to express his final thoughts about their shared experience. "Captain, I want you to know that working with you changed something important for me," Morrison said. "I've been in the military for over 2 decades, and I thought I understood what excellence looked like. You showed me that excellence comes in forms I hadn't considered before." Mitchell's response reflected the quiet confidence Morrison had come to associate with truly exceptional performers. "Chief, the honor was mine. Your team's professionalism made that mission possible. I just provided the transportation." As Morrison's helicopter lifted off for their new assignment, he watched Captain Mitchell's A-10 taxiing for another mission. He realized that their brief encounter had permanently altered his understanding of leadership, competence, and the changing face of America's military forces. Acknowledgement, while making notes in her flight log. "Smooth operations are always preferable, especially when you have passengers who aren't used to A-10 flight characteristics." Chen laughed despite the formal setting. "Ma'am, I don't think any of us will ever get used to riding in the back of a warthog. That's not exactly standard transportation for ground forces." The comment lightened the mood, but Morrison detected something significant in the interaction between his men and Captain Mitchell. His team was treating her with the kind of respect usually reserved for exceptional performers, recognition that had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with demonstrated competence under extreme conditions. After the formal debriefing concluded, Morrison found himself walking with Mitchell toward the aircraft maintenance area, where ground crews were conducting post-flight inspections on her A-10. He wanted to express his gratitude more personally, but he also found himself curious about her background and experience. "Captain, if you don't mind me asking, how long have you been flying combat missions?" Morrison asked. 18 months in theater, sir," Mitchell replied. "This is my second deployment to Afghanistan. I flew close air support missions in Iraq before transferring here." Morrison did quick mental calculations based on her apparent age and experience level. "You must have started flying pretty young to have accumulated that much combat time." Mitchell smiled at the observation. "I started flying when I was 14, sir. My father owned a ranch in Montana, and we used aircraft for everything from crop dusting to medical emergencies. I probably had more flight hours before joining the military than most pilots accumulate during their entire careers." The explanation provided context for her exceptional flying skills, But Morrison realized it also represented something significant about changing demographics in military aviation. Previous generations of combat pilots had been almost exclusively male, but younger officers like Mitchell represented a fundamental shift in military culture. That extraction today, Morrison continued, have you ever attempted anything similar before? No, sir, but I've landed on grass strips that weren't much better than your improvised landing zone, Mitchell replied. The principles are the same whether you're landing on a ranch airstrip or hostile territory. You assess conditions, calculate risks, and execute based on available options. Morrison found her matter-of-fact attitude impressive, but he also detected something else in her demeanor. There was no false modesty about her abilities, but there was also no arrogance or need to prove herself. She approached dangerous missions with the same professional competence that characterized the best operators he had worked with throughout his career. As they reached the maintenance area, Morrison watched ground crews conducting detailed inspections of Mitchell's aircraft. The A-10 showed minor damage from debris during landing and takeoff operations, but nothing that would prevent future missions. The aircraft's rugged construction had handled the unconventional mission without serious problems. Chief Morrison, Mitchell said, can I ask you something? Of course, ma'am. When you first saw me in that cockpit, what was your honest reaction? Morrison considered his response carefully, recognizing the importance of the question. I was surprised, I'll admit that, but my surprise lasted about 2 seconds because I realized that anyone skilled enough to land in those conditions and professional enough to volunteer for the mission deserved my complete confidence. Mitchell nodded. 6 months after the extraction mission, Master Chief Morrison found himself back at Bagram Airfield preparing for another deployment cycle. The Afghanistan rotation had become routine, but he carried with him memories of exceptional moments that had shaped his perspective on military service and leadership. The base had grown significantly since his last visit, with new construction and expanded facilities reflecting America's long-term commitment to operations in the region. Morrison walked past the flight line where A-10 Thunderbolts were lined up for maintenance, their distinctive silhouettes reminding him immediately of Captain Mitchell and their unconventional extraction. Word had reached him through informal military networks that Mitchell's improvised extraction had indeed become the subject of formal study by Air Force personnel recovery specialists. The mission had been analyzed, documented, and incorporated into training scenarios for pilots who might face similar emergency situations. Morrison's current team included 2 new operators who had recently completed SEAL training, young men eager to prove themselves in combat operations. During their pre-mission briefing, the topic of emergency extraction procedures came up, and Morrison found himself sharing the story of Mitchell's A-10 rescue. Chief, you're telling us that an A-10 pilot actually landed on rough terrain to extract your team? Petty Officer Jackson asked, his expression reflecting skepticism about the unconventional scenario. Not just any A-10 pilot, Morrison replied. Captain Sarah Mitchell, and yes, she landed on a rocky surface in hostile territory during a windstorm to get us out. It was the most professional piece of flying I've ever witnessed. The younger operators exchanged glances that Morrison recognized from his own early career. They were processing information that challenged their preconceptions about military aviation and personnel recovery operations. Morrison remembered having similar reactions when he first encountered situations that didn't match his training or expectations. Sir, was she as good as the male pilots you've worked with? Jackson continued, asking the question that Morrison knew was really on his mind. Morrison considered his response carefully, recognizing an opportunity to share lessons that had taken him 22 years to learn. Son, that's exactly the wrong question to ask. Captain Mitchell wasn't good for a female pilot. She was simply one of the best pilots I've ever worked with. Period. Gender didn't make her exceptional. Skill and courage did. The briefing continued with technical discussions about extraction, procedures, and contingency planning. But Morrison could see that his story about Mitchell had made an impression on his new team members. They were beginning to understand that military effectiveness came from individual competence rather than demographic categories. Later that afternoon, Morrison encountered an unexpected familiar face while reviewing intelligence reports in the Base Operations Center. Captain Mitchell was studying flight charts at a nearby table, apparently planning routes for her next mission. She looked up as Morrison approached, her face showing the kind of professional recognition that develops between service members who have shared dangerous experiences. "Master Chief Morrison," Mitchell said, standing to greet him. "I heard your team was back in theater. How have things been going?" "Captain Mitchell," Morrison replied, genuinely pleased to see her again. "Things have been good. We've had several successful missions, though none quite as memorable as our ride in your aircraft." Mitchell laughed at the reference, displaying the same understated confidence Morrison remembered from their first encounter. "I'm glad that worked out for everyone. I've actually used similar extraction techniques twice more since then, picking up-downed pilots who couldn't be reached by helicopters." Morrison wasn't surprised to learn that Mitchell's unconventional capabilities had been utilized again. Military leaders quickly recognized exceptional performers and found ways to leverage their unique skills for challenging missions. "How has the attention affected your career?" Morrison asked, knowing that their extraction had generated significant interest at higher command levels. "It's been interesting," Mitchell replied diplomatically. "I've briefed everyone from squadron commanders to Pentagon officials about rough field extraction techniques. The Air Force is developing formal training programs based on what we learned during your mission." Morrison realized that Mitchell's willingness to attempt an unprecedented extraction had created ripple effects throughout the military aviation community. Her individual act of courage was becoming institutionalized knowledge that would benefit future operations and save additional lives. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel Stevens, who immediately recognized both of them from their previous encounter. His expression suggested that their reunion was more than coincidental. "Chief Morrison, Captain Mitchell," Stevens announced. "Perfect timing. I was hoping to speak with both of you about a new mission requirement that's come down from Joint Special Operations Command." Morrison and Mitchell exchanged glances, recognizing that their previous collaboration might have created opportunities for future operations. Stevens gestured for them to follow him to a secure briefing room where classified mission information could be discussed freely. "Gentlemen, ma'am," Stevens began once they were seated, "we have a situation developing in eastern Afghanistan that requires unconventional extraction capabilities. Intelligence indicates that a reconnaissance team may become isolated in terrain that's unsuitable for helicopter operations." Morrison immediately understood the implications. Their previous extraction had proven that A-10 aircraft could provide personnel recovery capabilities in conditions where traditional methods were impossible. Military planners were apparently ready to utilize these capabilities for planned operations rather than just emergency situations. "Sir, are you requesting that Captain Mitchell provide extraction support for this mission?" Morrison asked. "That's exactly what I'm requesting," Stevens replied. "Your previous collaboration proved that unconventional methods can be highly effective. We'd like to make this capability available proactively, rather than waiting for emergency situations." Mitchell leaned forward, studying the operational map Stevens had spread across the briefing table. "Colonel, what are the surface conditions at the proposed extraction site?" "Similar to your previous landing zone," Stevens replied. "Rocky terrain, limited space, potentially hostile forces in the area. Weather conditions should be more favorable, but you'd still be operating well outside normal parameters." Morrison watched Mitchell analyze the mission requirements with the same methodical approach she had demonstrated during their first encounter. Her questions focused on technical factors rather than personal risk, evaluating aircraft capabilities against operational demands. "I can do it," Mitchell concluded after several minutes of study. "The landing zone is actually better than our previous site, and having advanced planning time will allow for better preparation." Stevens nodded satisfaction at her assessment. "Outstanding. Chief Morrison, your team would provide ground security and coordinate the actual extraction. Are you comfortable working with Captain Mitchell again?" Morrison realized that the question carried significance beyond simple mission planning. Military culture was evolving to recognize that the most effective teams were based on competence and trust, rather than traditional assumptions about gender roles or conventional procedures. "Sir, I can't think of anyone I'd rather have providing extraction support, Morrison replied. Captain Mitchell has proven her abilities under the most challenging conditions possible. Over the following weeks, Morrison and Mitchell worked together to develop detailed procedures for their upcoming mission. Their planning sessions revealed the depth of her technical knowledge and her ability to adapt aircraft capabilities to meet unusual operational requirements. "Chief, I've been thinking about passenger loading procedures," Mitchell said during one of their coordination meetings. "I think I can modify the cabin space to accommodate your team more comfortably without compromising aircraft performance." Morrison appreciated her attention to details that would improve mission effectiveness. "Ma'am, whatever you think works best. My guys are pretty adaptable, but comfort improvements are always welcome." The actual mission proceeded flawlessly, with Mitchell's extraction occurring exactly as planned, despite challenging terrain and weather conditions. Her landing was even smoother than their first encounter, demonstrating how advanced planning could improve already exceptional performance. As they flew back to friendly territory, Morrison reflected on how their professional relationship had evolved from surprise encounter to trusted partnership. Mitchell had become someone he could depend on completely, a pilot whose skills and judgment matched those of the best operators he had worked with throughout his career. 6 months later, as Morrison prepared to retire from active duty after 23 years of service, he received an invitation to attend Captain Mitchell's promotion ceremony. She was being advanced to Major, recognition of her exceptional service and innovative contributions to military aviation. During the ceremony, Morrison watched as Mitchell received recognition not just for her flying skills, but for her role in developing new tactical capabilities that had saved numerous lives. Her willingness to attempt one improvised extraction had evolved into systematic improvements in military personnel recovery operations. As Morrison congratulated the newly promoted Major Mitchell after the ceremony, he realized that their brief encounter had taught him lessons that would influence his thinking for the rest of his life. Excellence in military service came from individuals willing to push beyond conventional limitations, regardless of their background or demographic characteristics. "Major Mitchell," Morrison said formally, "it's been an honor serving with you." "The honor was mine, Master Chief," Mitchell replied. "You taught me that the best missions happen when professionals trust each other completely." Morrison left active duty knowing that the military was in capable hands with officers like Sarah Mitchell leading the next generation. Their story had become part of military folklore, proof that excellence could emerge from the most unexpected circumstances when competent people were willing to take calculated risks to help their fellow service members.